Well, are you a disciplined person? And how you were to answer that question would probably depend on your understanding of the word discipline. The focus of discipline can be to punish, or the focus of discipline can be to train. Or it can be kind of an amalgamation of both punishment in the sense of negative consequences and training as in the formation of a person's character. Now, if the purpose of discipline is solely to punish, then it amounts to nothing more than inflicting some sort of pain on a person for the sake of causing that person to suffer. And this, in my mind, is sadistic at worst and vengeful at the least. Now, I'm sure that some of us here, maybe all of us here, have been unjustly punished at some time in our lives by those who inflicted the punishment under the guise of discipline. And that's unfortunate, and that's just plain wrong. And the crucifixion of Jesus of Nazareth 2,000 years ago is a prime example of the punishment of an innocent man by vengeful people who used the law as a disguise for their evil intentions. Remember how they said to Pontius Pilate, if you release him, you are not a friend of Caesar's. Everyone who makes himself a king opposes Caesar. Well, they feared and hated Jesus, and they wanted him punished. Now, if the desired outcome of the discipline is to teach a person how to act in accord with a system of rules and regulations, I would think that would be a good thing if done for a good purpose. I ran a red light a number of years ago, and the municipality of Chesterfield in the state of Missouri disciplined me accordingly. I had to pay a fine to the city of Chesterfield, and I had some points assessed against my license in the state of Missouri. Well, I don't think that either the state or the city had it out for me personally, near as I could tell, although it kind of felt like it at the time. I think that they were trying to teach me something, to teach me to follow the rules that have been established for the sake of the common welfare. And so far it's working. I haven't run a red light recently. I sneak through a couple of yellow lights, but you can do that if you're crafty. Well, if the purpose of the discipline is to train through the imposition of negative consequences, I would think that would be a good thing, assuming that the training is in something that is good. I'm sure that everybody here this morning has also been subjected to the kind of discipline that's meant to instruct or train. We've had parents, perhaps, who, when we were young, who restricted our privileges when we abused them. Come in past your curfew, you get grounded the next weekend. Well, some of us have been disciplined by teachers when we were in school. Don't turn in your assignments, fight with another student, and you might find yourself having to stay after school. Now, we might have been disciplined by an employer who put us on probation for consistently coming late to work. Get your act together, come in on time, or you might find yourself unemployed. And creditors routinely discipline those of us who don't pay their bills on time. It's called a late payment fee. And while no one likes to be disciplined in the sense of being punished for violating rules and regulations, suffering the negative consequences, I think most of us would agree that discipline is a necessary fact of life. And then there's that other meaning of discipline, that which does not involve punishment per se, but is focused more on the training in the sense of formation. And while this type of discipline may involve some unpleasantries or some deprivations or deferred gratification for future gain, it really doesn't feel so much like one's being punished. Because in this type of discipline, the locus of control is usually internal as opposed to external. Some people exercise a fiscal discipline by saving money for a new car or vacation or perhaps their retirement. Athletes routinely discipline their bodies through rigorous physical training. Now, no one makes you save your money, and no one makes you exercise like that every day. You make yourself do it. It's called self-discipline. And that's the type of discipline I think we find in abundance here in the young people who apply to and are accepted at Washington University as students. Well, in the second reading from Hebrews, we hear God being compared to a parent who disciplines the children out of love for them. And the writer in Hebrews says it this way, quote, At the time it is administered, all discipline seems a cause for grief, not for joy. But later, it brings forth the fruit of peace and justice to those who are trained in its school. Now, in this context, it's quite clear that the desired outcome of discipline is not to cause suffering just for the sake of suffering, but to bring about peace and justice through training. So one question on the table for all of us here this morning, I would think, is this. Will we submit ourselves to this type of discipline, this type of training that's seemingly a cause for grief, but ultimately brings forth the fruit of peace and justice to those who are trained in its school? Another way of putting this, will we benefit from the discipline that God subjects us to, whether it's caused by God, permitted by God, I don't know, or by the self-discipline that we freely initiate in our own lives? Now, have you ever gone through something unpleasant in your life, something you would have rather avoided if it were in your power to do so, but you later look back on that experience with gratitude because you learned something from it that was invaluable, or because it changed your life for the better? Now, one such experience for me was back in 1968 when I was drafted into the Army. And those months in basic training were difficult and at times even brutal. I hated it. I hated the physical and the psychological abuse we were subjected to. I hated my every waking moment being controlled by drill sergeants, some of whom were sadistic and some were brutal. I hated the loneliness of being separated from my new wife of 13 months and my family and my friends. I hated the uncertainty of not knowing if I would be sent to Vietnam and the fear what might happen to me personally if I were sent into battle. Yet the discipline that I and my fellow soldiers were subjected to really helped shape my life and taught me that I could endure more than I ever thought possible. It helped make me a more disciplined man. I'm sure many of you have had similar experiences. Now, some of you who are students are in academic programs that might make Army basic training look like a walk in the park. And some of you who have endured illness or infirmity, whose medical treatment was far more painful than that suffered by a soldier in training. And some of you have endured loneliness that surpasses that of those of us who were drafted back in the 60s. And some of you have experienced pain and anxiety over problems that afflicted your loved ones. Perhaps you felt more powerless than a buck private in basic training. Well, I hope and trust that no matter what life has thrown at you, you've learned something that brings a greater degree of peace and justice and love into your lives. And it's way, way above my pay grade to adequately answer the question, where is God in the trials and the tribulations that we experience in life? I do believe that a God who is love, a God who is all good, doesn't cause us to suffer for the sole purpose of suffering. God's not a sadist, and God's certainly not vengeful. God is purposeful, totally, and God is totally foreseeing. And I'm one of those people who believe that God is somehow totally involved in our lives from the moment of conception till the time we enter the kingdom in its fullness and beyond. Now, I can't explain how or why that is, I just believe it. So I think God, through grace, operating with the free will that's part of our human makeup, does discipline us through the trials and tribulations, training us to become bit by bit the kind of men, the kind of women worthy of the kingdom that we're destined to inherit. Remember how Jesus said, "Be perfect as your heavenly Father is perfect." He said that, and He will do all He can to help us over time approximate that, become more and more perfect. So we should all strive to be disciplined people. There's nothing more pathetic than a person who's totally undisciplined. We would do well to discipline ourselves, to train ourselves, to become more and more the kind of people pleasing to God and pleasing to one another. We can discipline the bodies God's given us by being more attentive to our diet and our exercise habits. We can make good use of the medical care most of us are privileged to have by practicing preventive medicine. Get that mammogram, or that colonoscopy, or that prostate screening you've been putting off. Floss and brush your teeth and get them cleaned by a dental hygienist on a regular basis. Practice good hygiene during the flu season. Wear sunscreen when you go outside. And with this kind of an attitude, we can transform seemingly everyday mundane acts into moments of thanksgiving and praise. And when this happens, life itself becomes a prayer. We can discipline our minds through reading and study of things of substance. I can choose to mindlessly channel surf the TV every night, or instead, on occasion, read something of value. My conversations with people can be about sports and weather and work kind of thing, or they could be about the deeper things of substance to a human being, like the values that we hold dear, like the hopes and dreams that we have for ourselves and for each other and for the world. We can discipline ourselves as students and workers by stretching ourselves in the field of study that we're in or in the chosen profession that we're in to make better use of our unique God-given talents. Whatever we are, whatever we do, we can strive to become better at it. And we can discipline our spirits through prayer and meditation, spiritual reading, conversation, and a fuller participation in the sacramental life of the church. As adults, we should move beyond the spiritual level of development achieved at the end of our formal religious education, whether that be grade school, high school, or college. A lifelong commitment to the discipline of spiritual continuing education ought to be a goal for all of us. Well, while we can all be more disciplined in many of these areas in our lives, I think we need to be respectful of our individual differences. Now, some of us find it easier or harder to be more disciplined or less disciplined than others. I have the kind of personality that lends itself to discipline. I'm a creature of habit, sometimes to the point of rigidity. I'm pretty good at sticking to an exercise program, and I'm pretty faithful to my morning prayer and my spiritual reading. Evening prayer, not so good. Okay. Well, does that make me a person better than one who doesn't exercise or pray as frequently as I do? Not in the least. I believe that God looks more favorably, actually, on a person who's not as structured as I am. I admire those of you who are not as structured as me and who try harder than I do. I think God is pleased with those who give more from their want than from their plenty. Now, in the final analysis, no one, myself included, is as disciplined as we ought to be or can be in all areas of our lives. For example, I'm not as disciplined as I'd like to be in reaching out to and maintaining contact with people that I love. I could call more frequently, I could email more frequently, I could make a point to get together with my beloved friends on a more regular basis. I could be more disciplined there. So are you a disciplined person? I think you all are. Can you be more disciplined? I think we all can be. Can we accept what God either causes or permits to come our way and learn from our experiences? Yes, we can. Can we be proactive and discipline ourselves? We can try. Now, in the words of the second reading in today's Mass, we pray that we might all see the discipline in our lives not as, quote, a cause for grief, but as a cause for joy, because God's discipline and our self-discipline will, I quote again, bring forth the fruit of peace and justice to those who are trained in its school. And the discipline that we're learning in this classroom called life is training us to become worthy citizens of the kingdom of heaven. And that has to be worth the effort.